Welcome into HQ Spotlight on CBS Sports Network. I'm Jacqueline D'Agostino alongside Jeremy St. Louis, and we are starting 4 wide today with Leger Douzable and Pete Prisco. It is a very special day here at CBS Sports Network because Pete Prisco's top 100 NFL players list dropped. And Pete, right before it dropped, I love following you on social media. It's really an adventure. And you had said, the list is out, and you're not going to like it. And people are certainly telling you that they don't like it.
Yeah, they have for a long time. I've been doing this since I started here, which is a long time ago, and nobody likes where I put their players. Nobody, including you.
It's tough. I give Pete kudos because we had this discussion last year when you did your top 100, and I was like, you know what, Pete, I think I'm going to do a top 100, and I started to get into it, and I was like, this is really difficult, right? Trying to rank certain players. So what I did instead was I did the draft grades like you did this year instead of doing the top 100.
All right, well, yeah, the top 100 is out. It's over on CBSSports.com. Here's a position breakdown of how it all sets up. And wide receivers is the most popular position group. 17 wide receivers made the top 100. And look at the bottom of that left side, the least represented position group. Pete's favorite position.
Surprise.
Running backs. Only 2 of them made it in. All right, but we want to start by talking about the quarterbacks. And top of the list, overall, Chiefs quarterback Patrick Mahomes. Then you have at number 6, Josh Allen, who's throwing to insert receiver name here this coming season. Then Joe Burrow looking to bounce back, and the reigning MVP, Lamar Jackson, also on this list. And Aaron Rodgers, have to mention him because he's looking to play more than 5 plays this season. Well, more than 4. Get to 5, I guess. Let's dig into this with the author, Pete Prisco, and the critic. Leger is going to be the critic for this one, and these topics that we're going to discuss are all from Leger. But, Pete, I wanted to ask you first, just give us the criteria that you use to kind of set this list up.
Well, and he asked me earlier about, do I look at last year's list? And the answer to that question is no, I do not. I do not move anybody up or down based on last year's list. So what it is, it's based on how you played last year, where you are health-wise. I mean, if you have a major knee injury and we don't know if you're going to be the same player, you're probably not going to be ranked that highly. So injury, like Aaron Rodgers, coming off an injury, but he's ready to play. He's already, participated in practice and participated in OTAs. Didn't participate in the mini camp, but that's a whole nother story. But he's ready to play, so you rank him based on where you think he's going to be.
All right, so let's talk about these quarterbacks, starting with the guy at number 15, Joe Burrow. Played just 10 games last season. So, Pete, when you look at him and kind of where he falls, what's your thinking in terms of how you set Burrow at 15?
And he dropped down my list, actually. I didn't know that until
3 last year.
Yeah, and so, again, availability, the most important ability. He has to stay on the field. Joe Burrow, when on the field, is one of the best quarterbacks in the National Football League. But you have to be there, and he hasn't been a guy who's been on the field. He had issues at the beginning of last season, then he hurt his wrist. But before he hurt his wrist, they were at Baltimore in that game, and they were playing well and might have won that game. And so it could have changed the whole dynamic of the season. I think when he's on the field, he's still one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL, which is why I have him ranked ahead of Lamar Jackson by 1. Even though Lamar Jackson won the MVP, I think it's close. I would take Joe Burrow over Lamar Jackson fairly.
Yeah, and Pete, we've had this discussion. I always ask you parameters. You talked about it for this list, and you say you do factor in some injuries, whether a guy will be healthy or not. I had a little pushback because I love Joe Shiesty, but you said it. He hasn't really been available 2 of his 4 years, and then you put him in front of a guy that's won an MVP award 2 years already. I have to push back on that. And then when you look at your list, right, and we don't have the cornerbacks up, it seems like you punished Zaire Alexander more for being hurt than you did Joe Burrow. Because to me, Zaire Alexander is a top 3 corner when he's actually, physically healthy and on the field. I mean, just go ask CeeDee Lamb and also those receivers from the 49ers how good he is. Like, he literally took them away from the game. So that's why I push back and say, Lamar needs to be a little bit higher because he is coming off an MVP season. He's won 2 already. Love Joe Shiesty, and I love what you're saying. If the game's on the line in January, you would rather
Who are you taking?
I would take Joe Burrow. I'm not even going to lie.
You just answered
but if it's based off last year and availability, I would still put Lamar in front of him.
Yeah, see, he said he would take Joe Burrow, so Joe Burrow is higher on the list.
I'd probably take Joe, but only Patrick Mahomes I would take before Joe Burrow in that type of situation.
Well, you got a whole nother issue with Josh Allen. That's another story.
The truth is the truth.
and we'll dive into Josh Allen, but I want to keep it with the quarterbacks. We're talking about Aaron Rodgers, and of course, Aaron Rodgers actually rose up on your list. I know you said you don't look from year to year. 29 last year, he's actually at 20, and he's right behind Lamar Jackson. Of course, he played 4 snaps all last season, dealing with that injury, but how is he at 20, ahead of guys like Dak, CJ Stroud, who had an incredible rookie season, Tua? I know how you feel about Tua, but still, you have a conversation about it.
Aaron Rodgers is still a better quarterback right now than those guys. He is. Now, why did he rise on the list? Here's why. The upper middle class of the National Football League right now isn't very good. It really is not. And you look at it, we have a large middle class in the league, guys like from 30 to 70. I think there's a lot of guys that are interchangeable. But it used to be different. You used to get to 30 and you'd say, okay, well, 20s, there's guys all belong there. Well, now you look at it, and I asked somebody today, because I got a lot of pushback about where Aaron Rodgers is, who that's behind him should be ahead of him. That's the question. Not just the quarterbacks, but as the players. Yeah. CeeDee Lamb, maybe. He's the one that possibly should be ahead of him. The rest of them, I can make a case why Rodgers is where he is. As far as the quarterbacks, you might say C.J. Stroud should be ahead of him. Yeah. You're rushing to the altar, buddy. I mean, that's what you're doing.
Running up there.
Yeah, you are. I mean, let's slow the roll. I love C.J. Stroud. Yeah. I compared him to Dan Marino, which is the utmost praise for me, but let's slow it down just a bit.
Yeah, to me, and you know I love A.A. Ron. He plays for my Jets, hoping he can stay.
A.A. Ron.
A.A. Ron.
I love that you call him that.
A.A. Ron. But if you look at just what he's done the last 2 years, right? We know he got hurt after 4 plays last year, but even going back to 2022, which by a lot of quarterback standards would have been a decent year, but it was an off year for Aaron Rodgers. 26 touchdowns, 12 interceptions, which was almost a career high for him. And then when you look for the yards that he just threw under 3,700 yards. He was coming off 4 straight years, throwing over 4,000 yards, back-to-back MVP seasons. So the trajectory doesn't look good for Aaron Rodgers in regards to you making him a top 20 player. Yes, I do love C.J. Stroud. I know it's only been 1 year, but it was a year, Pete. And I know you've already said if he goes out and does it again, we might have to put him in that Dan Marino category. I think this kid is that good because when you look at the Houston Texans, nobody gave them a chance, Pete. I think they were tied for the worst on odds to go to the Super Bowl last year, and they went to the divisional round. Nobody was talking about Nico Collins, Tank Dell, and the rest of those skill position players in the offseason. Well, they talked about him because of C.J. Stroud. That lets you know how elite he is. So, yes, it's been 1 year, but I think he deserves to be higher on this list and honestly, in front of Aaron Rodgers.
If he does it again, he'll be much higher on the list.
Well, another guy who I'm not going to question you, Pete, but when I looked at the list, I was kind of like,
then you're questioning me.
That's okay.
That's a question.
That's okay.
Justin Herbert at 41 ahead of guys like Tua, a guy like CJ Stroud. Like when you look at Justin Herbert, is this a situation where you're not just looking at Herbert, but you're looking at Harbaugh, a guy who's a quarterback coach, to kind of give Herbert a little bit of a redemption story? He's fallen in comparison to last year, but when you look at Herbert now, is this redemption or regression story?
Well, and again, his record isn't great in large part because the team hasn't been great. He's dealt with offensive line issues. He's dealt with a ton of injuries at wide receiver. He was injured last year, and the defense has been a major problem. And they got rid of the coach, by the way, who went for it every time on 4th down, which was a smart decision. So I think you add it all up, there were things working against him. He's still one of the top quarterbacks in the National Football League. You look at that right arm and you go, oh my gosh, he can whip it, he can throw it with anybody. Here's the concern I have with Herbert going into this season. Yes, Jim Harbaugh will make that team better. Yes, Jim Harbaugh will make that team much more physical. But what are they going to do with the passing game?
Correct.
That's my concern.
Yeah.
We know Harbaugh wants to run the ball. He got more physical on the offensive line. He drafted a right tackle first in the first round. They want to run the football, but what does that do to Justin Herbert? Does it make him better, or does it make him J.J. McCarthy, a guy who didn't put up big numbers, even though he went in the first round? So that's my concern with Justin Herbert.
And that's a big concern for Herbert because when you look at him, his first 3 years, nobody has more passing yards than Justin Herbert. He is used to throwing the ball around the yard, and we know Jim Harbaugh wants to bring that physical nature, wants to run the ball. So we'll see how that marriage works out ultimately. I still think he's ranked too high. Love him for everything that you said. Right arm that has been blessed by the gods, can make every throw possible. But there's in-game situations when he is down and he doesn't get his team over the top. Too many times they've been down in the game, and he had the ball at the last possession and didn't get the win for them. So that's why I struggle putting him in front of guys like Dak Prescott, Jared Goff, who's had a lot of.
Dak has been great in the big moments.
No, but I'm saying, but even Jared Goff, who's had a lot of success, even including last year or with the Rams, how do you put Justin Herbert in front of him? You talked about the record, which is not all on him, but at the end of the day, most quarterbacks are judged on their record. He's 30-32 in his career. He has a losing record in the NFL. Again, not all on him, but I just have a hard time putting him in front of some of those other quarterbacks.
Building your team tomorrow afternoon, you get a pick between Justin Herbert, Dak Prescott, or Jared Goff. Which one are you picking?
That's actually a really good question.
It's a really easy question.
I probably would take Herbert.
You would take.
I would take Tua right now in front of him.
Say that loud.
I would take Herbert, but I would probably take Tua in front of him.
I wouldn't. I would take Herbert over all of them.
Somebody who has Herbert's number in the playoffs is T-Law, your guy, Trevor Lawrence. He loves to call him that. But
nobody aside from her calls him that.
That's actually not true, Pete.
Yeah, yes,
all of Jacksonville Twitter calls him T-Law. I'm just going to throw it out there. When this list first dropped, I said, hey, where's Trevor Lawrence? That was immediately where my mind went, because we know you're the mayor of Jacksonville, and you predicted his MVP-like season last year. Of course, that was derailed because of injuries. He is at 62, was 23 last year. Looking ahead for Trevor Lawrence, and he also just got paid. Are you taking all of that into account? What are your expectations this year? And talk about where you have him on the list.
I think I was a year ahead on my prediction for him a year ago.
Is that what that was?
And there were a lot of circumstances at play that worked against him. You mentioned the injuries. He didn't practice in the second half of the season. He could barely get out there and play. Probably should have sat out games. That's in large part why they went and got Mac Jones, because they saw what they had in C.J. Beathard as a backup. That's why Trevor kind of forced himself back out on the field too soon. The middle of the offensive line was dreadful. He took a beating. He was sped up the entire season. The wide receivers, once Christian Kirk went out of the lineup, they changed. Let's not forget, when Trevor Lawrence was healthy, he took the field on a Sunday night against the Baltimore Ravens as the number one seeded team in the AFC. He was hurt from there on out, didn't play as well. He bounces back in a big way, has a big season this year.
I'm waiting for Ashton Kutcher to come out, because this is punked, right?
Oh,
There's no way you have Trevor Lawrence ranked this high on this list. You have him literally in front of quarterbacks like Tua Tagovailoa, Jared Goff, Brock Purdy.
Better.
I got some stats for you, Pete, since you want to go there. No quarterback has more turnovers in 3 years than Trevor Lawrence. He leads the NFL in turnovers. You talk about injuries. Pete, you covered this game for a long time. You know after week 10, nobody is healthy. Case in point, Patrick Mahomes was on one ankle throughout the playoffs after that Jacksonville game and still took his team to win a Super Bowl. Joe Burrow, because that 1 year we went to the Super Bowl, how many times did he get sacked, Pete? Like 70 times? So I'm not trying to hear anything about injuries. You talked about it. They were 8-3 going into that week. They were the number one seed. You know what Trevor Lawrence did the last 5 weeks of the season? He had 10 turnovers. They went 0-5 in that span.
He pressed. He was, this the Josh Allen pressing.
And I'm so glad you brought that up, because people always talk about his upside, right, and what he can be. So I like to compare this to basketball, right? Sometimes as a jump shooter, your jumper's not falling, right? But how else do you affect the game? Whether it's getting more players involved, being a leader on the sideline during timeouts, talking to your teammates, or anteing up your defense and affecting the game that way. That's what Trevor Lawrence needs to take that step in. Even when he's banged up, sometimes not forcing the ball down the field, taking the check down, right? Or checking to the right play in the run game, right? Those are the things I want to see him do, but I haven't seen him. And everybody keeps talking about this upside that he has. When are we going to realize the upside? I think he's way too high on your list because, again, they had an opportunity not only to win the division, but potentially be the number one seed, and he played awful the last 5 weeks of the season.
The last 3 years, he's fourth in terms of yards passing among quarterbacks in the last 3 years.
You know what he's number one in? Turnovers. Yeah. The last 3 years.
He pressed. It's a bad situation. Well, the first year, come on, give me a break. That's Urban Meyer. You got to scratch that entire year.
Yeah, it doesn't count.
Urban Meyer years doesn't count.
Leger, who would you rather have as your quarterback, Josh Allen or Trevor Lawrence?
Why would you do that to me?
Because I need to know.
I would pick Josh Allen before him.
I would pick Josh Allen over Trevor Lawrence too, but I wouldn't pick Tua over Trevor Lawrence. I'll tell you that right now.
I would.
Wow. Okay. Well, we have to ask just about one position group, and that's the defensive tackles, because Leger, we know that's a position close to your heart. There's 10 in the top 100.
He's trying to show us some love, man.
I love that. Is this too many? Is this too little for you?
The crazy thing is I love that he showed defensive tackles some love, and I love that he put some guys on here that there aren't name guys, right? Aleem McNeil, who's played really well. We know Jalen Carter was a rookie last year. Justin Madubuike had a ridiculous year. And if people didn't watch the Patriots, you don't really understand how good Christian Barmore is. I don't think a few of these guys belong on the top 100. Jeffrey Simmons has been banged up the last few years. When healthy, though, is one of the most dominant defensive tackles in football. A guy he left off this list, DeForest Buckner, I think belongs on this list before Aleem McNeil, Jalen Carter. And I know our producer James is a big Panthers fan, but I believe he belongs before Derrick Brown. Derrick Brown is a good run stopper. But in today's NFL, you have to affect the quarterback, and he routinely doesn't do that.
Well, they are changing defensive style in Carolina. He was asked to be mainly a run stuffer in Carolina. He would be much more now that they changed defense. You watch where his numbers go. As far as Aleem McNeil, he was dominant last year. I mean, he deserved to be in there.
I think DeForest
Buckner was in there. He got pushed out. He was one of the honorable mentions. So you're splitting hairs there. Yeah. Christian Barmore is the guy. Most people wouldn't have him in the top 100. Put that tape on. That guy's a dominant
He was
player.
dominant last year.
Pete Prisco, Leger Douzable breaking down Pete's top 100 list, which is available over on CBSSports.com. And we're not done talking about it, are we?
No, we certainly are not, because we know how Pete feels about running backs. And the number of backs in his top 100 certainly reflects that.
What position?
This guy, CMC, is on there. We're going to talk about that position coming up next. Back here on HQ Spotlight, and we are combing through Pete Prisco's top 100 NFL players, and this is a very short list. It's indicative of how Pete Prisco feels about the running backs.
They had to put in honorable mentions just to make the graphic look good.
Literally, because it would have been half empty. Of course, we have Christian McCaffrey at number 8, and then we have to go all the way down to number 91, nearly the bottom of the list, to find the next running back, and that is Derrick Henry, who, by the way, is 30. So according to Pete, he's about to age out of the NFL.
It's a cruel position in the National Football League, as they found out recently.
And as you can see, a handful of honorable mentions there. Back here with Pete and Leger, we're going to talk about the running backs. Of course, we have CMC, we have Derrick Henry in there. We're going to get into that. Only 2, though, Pete?
Well, I think that a lot of those guys are all interchangeable. I mean, you could make a case for Kyron Williams being at the back end of the top 100. Breece Hall, you can make a case for him. You can make a case for a couple others. But in the end, I went with McCaffrey, who's clearly the best back in the National Football League because he's an air back. He's a guy that you can line up wide. You can catch the ball out of the backfield, screen game. He's good in between the tackles. He's a tough kid. He's the perfect back for the modern NFL. Derrick Henry went in because he can still be a productive player. I'm concerned about years and carries. He's had a lot of wear and tear on that body. I think going to the Ravens is a good thing for him. With Lamar Jackson and his ability to run, that will create more lanes for Derrick Henry to get that big body going. In Tennessee, the offensive line was woeful. He had problems. It takes him time. He's not one of those guys. The old adage on Derrick Henry is if you get at his feet and don't let him get going, you're going to have a good day against him. Well, that happened way too often last year in Tennessee.
You mentioned Jets running back Breece Hall. Let's talk about him. 6 yards shy of 1,000 yards, 4th in all-purpose yards. Not even an honorable mention? Not even an honorable mention, Pete? I mean, is this criminal? What do you
No, it's ludicrous is what it is. It's asinine. Like, I can't believe you didn't even put him on honorable mention.
Yeah, I think he was on there, and I might have taken him off.
Because if you look at it, you talked about Derrick Henry and that abysmal offensive line. It was a turnkey style offensive line for the Jets. Like, they had 13 different combos starting at offensive line for the Jets. So you talk about having no continuity up there. And then they had 4 different quarterbacks play. So you know everybody's coming into each week. We have to stop Breece Hall. We can't let him get going. And you talked about it, Jeremy. 4 in all-purpose yards, right, with a terrible O-line and no quarterback play. And he really showed, I know, Pete, you always talk about the airbacks. He really showed that as a pass catcher, I think it surprised the staff a lot, that he can be a viable weapon for a quarterback out of the backfield. They started getting him the ball more in space, almost 600 yards receiving. That's like a number 3 receiver on the team, Pete. So when you look at him, if the offensive line stays healthy and Aaron Rodgers is back to what he was, Breece Hall could push 2,000 all-purpose yards and be right there with Christian McCaffrey.
Well, if he gets 2,000 all-purpose yards, he's going to be higher on the list next year.
I hope we put him in the top 10 like Christian McCaffrey.
He ain't a top 10 runner. He ain't a top 10 player in the National Football League.
What if he goes 2,000 all-purpose?
Well, then we'll have a conversation. And then in 3 years after that, they'll be looking for a new one.
Oh my God!
that's the nature of the position. Draft, develop, run them, and graft another one.
So the fact that Derrick Henry's 30 and he's on this list is like
pretty amazing.
Really, yeah.
So Raheem Mostert's 30. He led the league in rushing touchdowns.
Right. And then they bring the other guy in and they rotate him with him. Right. I mean, there's no back that's just your back anymore. That's the problem.
That's
Christian
true.
McCaffrey is just your back because he can do so many different things.
Yeah. All right, let's go from the running backs because we know Pete hates them and go to the wide receiver position. Now, the most, in terms of the position players that are on the list, 17 wide receivers led by Tyreek Hill. You have CeeDee Lamb in there, Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase, Devontae Adams rounding out the top 5 wideouts. Top 5 in the top 26 overall, those 5 wide receivers. But one player not on the list, Texans wide receiver Stephon Diggs. He caught more passes than Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase, and Devontae Adams. Not even an honorable mention, Pete?
Well, that's a problem because he was an honorable mention, so somehow he got left off the list that came out because he was actually on the bottom of the list, and I took him out and moved other guys back up. So he is an honorable mention. I'll take blame for that, although I don't know if I'm truly to blame for it, but I will take the blame for it. He's definitely an honorable mention, but he didn't do anything in the last 8 games of the season, very little. And he's going to point to the change of the offensive coordinator and Josh Allen, and he didn't throw the ball. And the reality is he's just not the same player. We talk about 30. Yeah, how old is he? He's 30.
He just turned 30.
He's 30. And the Bills were willing to get rid of him. Yes, there was a money situation as well, but they didn't have any wide receivers at all, and we're still willing to get rid of him. So there's always a concern with that. Is he still a good player? Yes. Is he a top 100 player in the NFL? Absolutely not.
This is how you know he a Josh Allen truther. He didn't even put the man on honorable mention, right? Because he's up out of there. My thing is, I can't wait to see the Bills this year because I think you tend to forget, and a lot of people, that Josh Allen didn't become Josh Allen until Stephon Diggs got there, right?
First Stephon Diggs. Yeah, early Stephon.
Okay, well, look, you told me to point the numbers out. Let's point the numbers out. In the first 10 games last season, when Ken Dorsey was the offensive coordinator, right, Stephon Diggs had 110 targets. When they made that change to Joe Brady, who was more conservative, ran the football more, got James Cook more involved in the passing game, only 75 target. You're talking about 25% drop-off. So, of course, he's not going to have the same numbers the last 8 games. And then when you turn on the film, Pete, they just seem like Stephon Diggs and Josh Allen were not on the same page. And this could have been going all the way back to training camp when that happened with him and McDermott and that whole issue there where Stephon Diggs was, quote-unquote, was excused from minicamp or wasn't excused from minicamp. We just don't know. But again, Stephon Diggs deserves to be on this list because he had almost 1,200 receiving yards last year. So he's still playing at a very high level. And Jeremy, you pointed out, some of the top receivers in the league, he had more receptions than them. And that's not getting the ball as much the back half of the season. So again, I cannot wait to see this Josh Allen-led team without a Stephon Diggs on it because he was not Josh Allen until Stephon Diggs got there.
Or you can't wait to see what Stephon Diggs does for C.J. Stroud in the passing game. Does he mess that vibe up? I mean, that's a good question. I mean, that's a legitimate question to ask. So he did nothing in the last 13 games of the season. Nothing. 0. And that's a concern when you see a guy that falls off that much, whether it's from not getting that many targets. And the targets didn't fall off that much. A quarter. 25%. To those numbers, though, no 100-yard games in the last 13 games.
That's because they ran the ball, and you knew they ran the ball.
Okay, but if you're going to run the ball, shouldn't that help open up the play action and get some shots down the field to your number one?
Not when he's the only one getting double teamed. Yeah. Kincaid got the ball more because he was getting single coverage.
The bottom line is I'm worried about the lack of production in the last 13 second half.
I'm worried about the Bills and Josh Allen without Stephon.
You shouldn't be. Guy's going to carry him deep into the postseason again this year.
When it comes to the receivers, the highest paid wide receiver now is not the highest ranked one here on this list. It's Tyreek, and then it goes JJ. Leger, would you flip that? Would you put JJ ahead of Tyreek?
Without a doubt. And me and Pete had this conversation earlier. I get why you put Tyreek Hill up there, right? Because he scares defensive coordinators with that speed. But I don't think there's a better playmaker than Justin Jefferson. I mean, when you just look at his trajectory and what he did when he was in the NFL, while he was in the NFL, rookie year over 1,400 yards, second year over 1,600, third year over 1,800 yards. So you're thinking, guys, he's probably going to go over 2,000 yards, but then he gets banged up last year, Pete. But you see it in 8.5 games, he still went over 1,000 yards, and most of that was without Kirk Cousins, his starting quarterback. So, I mean, he's just a special player. If you just put the ball in his vicinity, he has a chance to come down with it. Remember 2 years ago versus Buffalo, 4th and 18 in triple coverage. He goes up and catches the ball with 2 fingers to keep them alive, and they win that game. Just this past year, 3rd and 27, again, he was triple team. Just give him an opportunity. He comes down with the ball versus the Lions, keeps them in the game. Now, they ultimately lose that game, but with Justin Jefferson, if you just put the ball in his vicinity, he has a chance. The quarterback, all you got to do is just put it near him. He'll come down with the football.
Look, Justin Jefferson's a great player. But based on last season And what Tyreek Hill did, those numbers were unreal. And you look at the average per game, which is where you can use that comparison because he didn't play the entire season.
Right.
And Hill's numbers were better. Hill does what no other receiver in the league does. Nobody. And they're all great receivers. Chase is a great receiver. Jefferson's a great receiver. Nobody does what Tyreek Hill does, which is put the fear of God in opposing defensive backs. Every time he takes the field, he has that ability with that speed. That's why I put him at number 4.
Last year, CeeDee Lamb was sitting at 48. This year, he makes a jump, and he must have seen the list, Pete, because he went out and just led the league in receptions last season, and is a guy who obviously is in line for a big contract. Leger, when you look at where CeeDee Lamb is, do you agree with him being in the position he is, or should he be listed higher? And if he does, I mean, you look at who's above him, JJ, Jamar.
Yeah. To me, I think he's right where he needs to be. I think 21 is a sweet spot for him. I can't put him in front of Jamar Chase when you look at the whole body of work. I think there was a lot of questions, and even me, I questioned, was CeeDee Lamb a true number 1 going into the season? Well, Jeremy, you just announced it. He answered all those questions. Number 1 in NFL in receptions, number 2 in receiving yards. And there were games he literally took over. Go put on that Detroit Lions tape. Over 200 yards and a touchdown and led them to that win there. So even in that loss versus the Green Bay Packers, 17 targets in that game, and he came down with 9. Now, Jair Alexander got the best of him sometimes, but he's a true number 1 receiver. And when you look at him, Dak Prescott, Micah Parsons, I honestly think Dallas is going to pay CeeDee Lamb first before they pay the other 2 guys.
Yeah, last year, going into the last season, it was Devontae Adams was the 4th receiver. He passed him this year. And I think you look at it, there's a clear line between the top 4 and down.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
I think the top 4 are easily, you can argue those guys, but I think there's a big difference between 4 down on that receiver list.
And I want to finally circle back to the Jets, Leger, because we talked about.
It always comes back to the Jets.
It always does. We talked about Breece Hall being left off of the list in terms of the running backs. When it comes to the receivers, Garrett Wilson does make the list, and Pete, that's impressive considering he's not catching passes from Aaron Rodgers.
From anybody. He was catching passes from a bunch of nobodies. I mean, that tells you how good he is as a player, and he deserves to be on this list. And with Aaron Rodgers back, I wouldn't be surprised if he's much higher on this list next year. He's one of those players you see him grow and develop. The best football is in front of Garrett Wilson.
Yeah, I talked to Pete. I had a little gripe about him putting George Pickens in front of him because when you look at it, you stated it perfectly, Jacqueline. 4 different quarterbacks threw Garrett Wilson the ball last year, right? They were all set up for him and Aaron Rodgers to take the league by storm. And in 4 plays that ended, I mean, Tim Boyle threw him passes. Zach Wilson threw him passes.
Rudolph,
Trevor Siemian.
Pickett. I mean, Mason
Rudolph actually played really well for the Pittsburgh Steelers. And Pickens played a lot better with Rudolph
He's
there.
in that pile of backup quarterbacks in the National Football League. You reach in, they're all the same.
All right, I got a question for you. Would you take Mason Rudolph or Tim Boyle, Trevor Siemian,
I would take Mason Rudolph. But
Thank you.
They all worked. A couple of years ago, you would have said, would you take Mason Rudolph over anybody? And you would have said no. So they all work. They all somehow find themselves right back into the same pot. You throw them in there. Backup quarterback, we need you for 2 games. You play, back in you go.
I would say the Steelers had a better situation than Garrett Wilson did when you talk about the bad O-line play from the New York Jets. And then also, everybody knew he was getting the ball. There was no other receivers that scared anybody on that team.
If you're playing your backup quarterback, you're doomed.
Because you are.
He always says that.
You're doomed. You're done.
That's true.
If it's more than 2 games, you're done.
Pete's favorite backup quarterback is, in fact, Gardner Minshew, by the way, in case you were wondering.
He should be a backup.
Leger Douzable joining us here as we were breaking down Pete's top 100 NFL players list. Just a reminder, you can find that right now on CBSSports.com.
And the season begins September the 8th on CBS and Paramount+. Hey, week 1, we get the all-Florida battle between Jacksonville and Miami in the 1 p.m. window. We also have Jim Harbaugh's debut as the Chargers head coach. They welcome the Raiders in the late window. NFL on CBS and streaming on Paramount+, starting September the 8th.